Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry. Illinois had almost 200 cases reported last year, and Chicago is considered an international hub. Today, on the Roundtable Perspective, Dr. Charles Hounmenou joins me in examining this problem and discussing how we can recognize it all around us. Welcome to the Roundtable Perspective. I'm your host, Tom Roach. I'm joined by my guest, Charles Hounmenou from the Jane Addams College of Social Work with the University of Illinois in Chicago. Welcome. Today we're going to discuss human trafficking, and I'd like to start off by talking about Chicago, because I understand most of the human trafficking seems to be concentrated along the southern border of the United States, but yet Chicago is the fifth largest city when it comes to the human trafficking problem. Why is that?
Okay, I will not talk about Chicago. I will talk about Illinois.
Sure, okay.
Illinois is the fifth state based on the number of cases of human trafficking and based on the data collected by the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, which is called today the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So when you talk about Illinois, of course, you are talking about Chicago, because Chicago is the biggest city in Illinois. So most cases of human trafficking occur in Chicago and the surrounding suburbs.
I see.
Yeah, and also, as you know, research has shown that I will say in the newspaper, the New York Times, in 2003, did report that Chicago was considered a hub of human trafficking in the U.S. And, you know, subsequent research or subsequent papers have just been over-reporting that all the time. But I don't trust much what is from a newspaper. Right. But in some way, it is true.
Well, I'm sure in part because a lot of that moves through Chicago because of O'Hare Airport and the interstate traffic system.
You have a great point there, because you know O'Hare is one of the biggest airports in the country, and in the Midwest, I think O'Hare is I don't know, maybe the biggest airport, and so the traffic at O'Hare is very high, and you could notice that most people coming to the U.S. In the Midwest, people land at Chicago O'Hare before moving to other states. Right. So it's easy for traffickers to get their victims coming from abroad through O'Hare. Yeah. And the way you can know it is like, you know, when you get to you get to O'Hare, you might see many people with cards with names. Yeah. I think some of them are there just to wait for people coming in, but not knowing that they are going to be enslaved.
Oh, that's amazing.
So you might see some names. What happened? A girl might come from another country. They promise a job to her. Someone is at the airport to welcome her. So she's welcome, she's happy.
So she doesn't know that she's being trafficked?
No. For example, they send someone to a country like Russia. Or Moldova, or I don't know. And then they try to recruit girls for some kind of top model jobs. And they promise them, okay, you're going to make money and so on. The girls will accept. So they target specific girls who have some kind of assets.
So she gets off the plane thinking somebody's there to welcome her. She sees her name on the sign. She follows that person. And
first of all, she has a boyfriend there or someone who recruits her and said, I'm going to follow you. Yeah. So they make paperwork, everything. They get visas, regular visas. They have networks of that. They have networks even inside embassies. Yeah. So they get the visa, and the lady, either as a girlfriend or just as a partner or someone who, to whom jobs have been promised. She will come, and someone will welcome her at the airport. That's the way it happens most of the time. Someone welcome her, they put her maybe in the van. Already in the van, they ask for her passport, everything. They take everything from her. And I can say, mostly from there, she might not know what's going to happen till she gets to the suburbs, and then she realizes that, oh, wait a minute. She will say, when am I going to start the work?
Yeah.
And she can see, she'll be surprised.
Yeah.
And gradually, they'll break her will. And she might see, wherever she is, but the other people in the same condition, and she will say, oh, if I don't comply, I might be in trouble. That is most of the time the way it happens for international victims.
Yeah. I think recently there was a flight attendant that discovered two women who were being trafficked in.
Yeah.
Was that in California, I think?
I don't remember the place, but I remember that the case because there is a kind of NGO, a non-governmental organization, trying to train air hostesses about how to recognize.
Sure.
So she was able to identify based on the behavior on those ladies. Because most of the time, the people, those kind of victims are prepared not to tell the truth or to hide what is happening to them. But based on the training she got, she was able to identify them and report, and those ladies were saved.
Yeah, that's good. So there are three types of trafficking, right?
Okay, first of all, let me go by defining what trafficking
Sure.
is. Okay, so when you talk about trafficking, most of the time I use kind of a framework. I use a framework I called AMP. AMP framework. A means action, M means means, and P purpose. So to talk about
the action, the means, and the purpose.
Yes.
Okay.
So for the action, we say just for the action. So human trafficking is the action of transporting, providing, obtaining, harboring, moving a person. Now means by force, by coercion, by fraud. Purpose, either for commercial sex acts or labor or services. So you have to have one element from each of these. But there is a recent law of human trafficking, the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, which added soliciting, patronizing. So which means that John, who is patronizing someone in prostitution, today is considered a trafficker. So when you see that, you know that you have trafficking. But for children, a child doesn't need to be forced into prostitution or to be coerced before being qualified as a victim. Any minor, any person below age 18 in the sex trade is automatically considered a victim. Even if she says she knows what she's doing, she is a victim because she doesn't have the maturity to know or to choose what is right for her body.
Now, one of these categories is called debt bondage, and that's kind of complicated. Can you walk us through that?
Okay, so that gets me to talk about after the definition, the three types.
Yes.
Sex trafficking.
Right.
After sex trafficking, you have labor trafficking.
Right.
Okay, sex trafficking is when, for example, you force someone, okay, or you put them by force and so on to do any commercial sex act, okay? And in that, you have sex trafficking of adults, sex trafficking of children. I'm going to talk about sex trafficking of children in depth later. And in labor trafficking, you have debt bondage. Most of the cases I'm talking about, when I say when people get here, they are forced to work to repay how much, was spent on them. It's already a debt bondage. It's like, we brought you here, we spent $20,000. You will be working for us till you finish paying, but there is no end because the person doesn't even know how this is being documented. This can be documented. This can be a case of debt bondage. If you go to other countries, it happens a lot. Like in India,
Yeah.
issue of death bondage is where it's going to spread all over the country.
Well, yeah, and the reason I ask about that is I think maybe, for the wrong reasons, but I think people are familiar with the sex, the slave labor, the sex trade, and things like that. But I don't know if everyone realizes that sometimes they may be hiring someone to work at their house who's actually being victimized by debt bondage. And this person may be cleaning the house for them, maybe doing some landscaping, right?
Okay, so for such people, even though it is a type of debt bondage, it is better to use the broader term labor trafficking.
Okay, sure.
Because, first of all, most of them, I would say 71% of workers coming to, in these kind of conditions, came to the US legally with regular visa. Mm-hmm. Most of the time they get H-2B visa.
So these are people who came in on their own?
They came on their own.
Yeah.
They were helped in some way to get those papers because they want better life.
Right.
And they get the visa, everything. Yeah. But it's only when they get here that they are told that, oh, you have to pay us upfront because we spend money. And they say, okay, we'll get the money from you, so you work for us till you finish paying. So from there, the person has no choice because they do not know about the law, the policy of the country. They believe the traffickers who threaten them.
Well, and they're afraid of the law because there's the possibility they could be identified and then sent home, right?
Okay, they can be sent home, but based on the law, when you are a victim, a documented victim of human trafficking, you are qualified for protection. Oh, yeah. And you are not, you may not be sent home depending on your case. It can be proven that going home can put your life in danger.
Right.
The policy is built in a way that there are services for such people. People talk about T-visa. T-visa, visa. These visas are there to help such people. But those people you are talking about who are working in some places like in hotels or in private places, of course, some of them are in these cases and they don't even know. They don't even know that they are victims. Because when you bring someone in willingly, you let them work and pay you, but forcing them, keeping the paperwork is already trafficking.
So when they say there are 15 to 24,000 people working in Chicago that are working under those conditions, is that
22?
Well, I mean, the number I had was 15 to 24,000 people in the Chicago area that are victims of human trafficking.
Okay, you are talking about a study.
No, that's all of it, I assume, right?
It has been cited many times.
Yeah.
There was a study of 2008 where it was mentioned that between 16,000 and 25,000 women and girls are in the sex trade in Chicago annually, I think. But, okay, I read the study. The way they got to that kind of statistics is kind of difficult to to trace that, but it's what we have, okay? So
that's involved in the sex trade.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious before we go on, I mean,
there are better data. There are better data than that.
Okay.
Because when you talk about sex trafficking, which is related to prostitution, if you want, I can distinguish both. You can see there is another study which showed, for example, that there are 4,400 girls and women weekly in prostitution in Chicago. Yeah. And there are, I will say, probably 175,000 Johns, different Johns, who are kind of preying on those women. This research was done in 2007. Mm-hmm. And when you rely to the National Human Trafficking Research Centers, you have more recent data just confirming these findings.
Now, this data, though, is based on estimates, right? I mean, there's no real way to count these things.
Okay. When I take the data from the National Human Trafficking Resource Center, these are not estimates. These are cases reported, really reported to the National Human Trafficking Resource Centers. Cases are reported by people like you, like me, by service providers, and victims too, because there are numbers to call. And there are also other ways people can contact to ask for help. So it was based, mostly it's based on data they collected. And to tell you what I know about it, it's like it started in December 2007. Up to December the 30th, 2017, I will say close to 72,000 victims have contacted the National Human Trafficking Resource Center. And every year, the number keeps growing.
Well, yeah, that's a solid number. Just to go back to it for a second, though, I just want to explore the labor trafficking side of this again. So what do you think those numbers look like by comparison in Chicago area, for instance?
Okay. First of all, labor trafficking is difficult to document.
Right.
And, I developed a fact sheet on human trafficking, but what is well known. Yeah. And in the fact sheet, I clearly I used some research showing that actually most law enforcement agencies, most service providers, they do not do much about labor trafficking because they do not see it as priority. I will say there are only 2 or 3 major studies on labor trafficking in the US. One study was done in San Diego by a professor called Zeldon Zhang. He studied labor trafficking in San Diego. The bigger study was done in 2014 by the Urban Institute, and they studied labor trafficking in 8 cities in the US. And this was the first study to really document how labor trafficking occurs and the network of people involved in labor trafficking. It has proven that it is an issue, but the problem is that it's difficult to document that. And actually for that research, they have to analyze existing data. They didn't contact victims. For the Zhang study, they used what we call respondent-driven sampling, which is a process through which you recruit some people you call the seeds. The seeds are those who are going to be helping you recruit all the others. And the respondent-driven sampling technique helps you to estimate the population. The researcher was able to estimate that population in San Diego, and he tried to extrapolate for the US.
Just, if you would speculate for a second, I mean, what are some ways in which just average people in Chicago might come into contact with people that have been trafficked in for labor? What kinds of jobs would we see them in?
Okay, when you talk about labor, everyone can get into contact, can be in contact with someone who is victim of labor trafficking, and you may not know. Even in hotels you go to in Chicago, I'm sure some of the people working there are victims. The hotel management might not even know. As I told you, people who kind of put them there to work might be the traffickers, and those people are not supposed to talk till maybe you have a conversation with them, and then if you have a training on trafficking, you can guess, this person might be a victim who needs help.
What's going on with legislation in the United States? What kind of anti-trafficking legislation are we working on?
I can say that, honestly, the U.S. Has, I will say, the best policy related to human trafficking. The U.S. has the best policy in the world. So the U.S. has been playing a vanguard, a forefront, a leading role on taking on the issue of trafficking since 2000. Because it was in 2000 that we had the first biggest policy addressing human trafficking, which is called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. They call it TVPA most of the time.
I mean, that's fairly recently for a problem that's been going on for a long time. I'm just curious, do you think that in the United States we just thought of this as a problem that was in other countries, it was in third world countries, but it wasn't here?
Yeah, for a long time. For a long time, it was believed that this issue relates only to people coming from abroad. And actually, that law I'm talking about, at the beginning, it was created to address the issue of victims coming from abroad. Okay? So, you know, victims coming from abroad, we said they are victims of international human trafficking. And victims from the US are called victims of domestic trafficking. So that law, following the years, there were more than 6 others to reinforce that TVPA. And it is doing great work regarding how to tackle the issue in the US. So I can say that, and I can also say that in Illinois, we have one of the best policies in place to address the issue of human trafficking.
Yeah, you wouldn't know of an example you could give us of someone who was caught and how that worked, how they were caught, or just for a case study?
You mean the victims?
No, a trafficker.
Oh, traffickers. I will say that recently, in the last 5 to 6 years, there have been many traffickers who have been arrested in Illinois and who have been prosecuted. I have some names, but I don't want to scorch the names.
Right.
But I'm sure of at least 20 people who have been prosecuted thanks to the Cook County Human Trafficking Task Force, which have been doing tremendous job addressing the issue with Sheriff Tom Dart, who is kind of spearheading the movement to address the issue of Johns, because currently they are trying to, they are no longer considering women as criminals, they are targeting men now. And that's where we have, they are trying to end the demand of prostitution.
Let's switch to that for a second then. What about rescuing victims of trafficking? Do you have a...
In Illinois or in the US?
In the Chicago area. Can you think of a nameless case study for us here?
Yeah. Cases of victims who have been rescued. First of all, are we talking about a study which was done in 2006 by the Heartland Alliance, which is one of the biggest agencies addressing the issue. They did have a study in which they showed that they served 63 international victims, international human trafficking victims in Chicago. Okay, and beyond that, the most recent study where victims of trafficking have been have participated in study was in 2014, in which they studied victims of youth in the sex trade. So the good thing to know is that the state has been developing a lot of ways to rescue these victims. And when they are rescued, most of the time, they are referred to social service providers. And one of the agencies helping those victims is called Stop It program. And they have been doing great work about that. Most of them are based in Chicago. So a lot of work has been done to help victims at the state level. And something else you need to know is that today, any child or any women in prostitution are no longer considered, whatever they do is considered a misdemeanor, not a felony. Okay. They are sent for services not as criminals at all, and children too.
Well, as we're closing here, maybe it would be useful to just kind of give us a profile. What are the characteristics of someone who tends to be victimized by this? Can you address that a little bit?
Okay, you are talking about the factors of vulnerability of people. Okay, you will see as the first thing which can make a person a victim is related to their moving to another place, like moving to another city or moving to the US. The second issue can be substance use. Substance use kind of expose people to be victimized. The third one will be a situation of someone who is a homeless or who is a runaway, okay? Right. And the fourth one, which people don't kind of talk much about, is that most victims were involved in the child welfare system. So in some way, there is a link between child welfare system and the issue of
involved, like in what way?
They were being served they were being served by the child welfare system. For example, 88% of runaways who were found to be victims of trafficking were being served, were in the foster care system when they ran away.
So in other words, a social worker or someone like that had already been working with them at some
yes,
point.
and they run away. They run away because it's easy for pimps, you know what pimps
Yes,
are,
right.
to get
Yeah.
to them.
Yeah.
And it happens all the time. So I'm thinking about doing research to know the real issue and how to kind of prevent such kind of things happening.
That is all the time we have for our program. Thank you to Dr. Hounmenou for joining me today on the Roundtable Perspective. I'm Tom Roach. See you next time.